When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
Doug. Limu and I always tell you to customize your car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. But now, we want you to feel it. Cue the emu music, Limu.
Save yourself money today. Increase your wealth. Customize and save, we say.
That may have been too much feeling.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast with Rich Ferraro.
Hello and welcome to 1865. It's Rich here and I'm joined for the first time in YATESY'S Espresso Bar by Mr. George Edwards. George, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Pleasure to finally join you on the show after months after its launch. So yes, very good, thank you.
And what kind of caffeinated beverage can we get you from the bar?
Although I work in a coffee shop, it took me about 2 years to actually like coffee. And I can just about stomach a latte with 2 sugars.
Okie doke. Well, many years ago, I was the same. I worked behind the bar in a coffee shop well before I started drinking the stuff. But I am going to go for a Mocha Valencia once again, I think. So anyway, what we're drinking isn't very important to you, the listener. What is important is what we're going to be talking about today. So obviously, we are recording on the 14th of October. So the big stories are the whole situation between Ange Postecoglou and if he's going to stay at the club and whether Sean Dyche is going to be the man who will take over, if so. We are also thinking about the departure of Ross Wilson and the ground plans that have been announced by the club in the last few days. Obviously, we alluded to some of those issues in our Football Terrorist show just the other day, but we want to take a bit of time to really delve beneath the surface there.
Welcome to YATESY'S Espresso Bar.
And let's start off with the issue of the Forest first team head coach. Now, George, you have just come off an appearance on Sky Television where you were discussing that very issue. So, how was the debate framed? And let's also think about what is the issue at hand. So, do you think, and do Sky think, that Ange Postecoglou's job is seriously under threat?
I think there's a consensus from that, a general consensus in the media. And I mean, you know what, the media and Sky, particularly TalkSport, are like, if there's any sense of that, particularly Forest, the sort of chaotic club that we've been billed as, and Ange as this big character, they're going to be all over that. You know, I went on Sky and they have a 2-hour show, and it was the first bulletin of that show. It was the longest bulletin of that show. It was the big talking point. And I know it's an international break, which obviously there's not that much to talk about from a club sense. And Forest have had our best result in a while this weekend, having not played. But yeah, I think there is a big sense that Ange is under pressure. I think that comes from him as well in his press conferences. He never looks that comfortable, and he's always quite standoffish. And we've sort of got used to that demeanour, so you don't know whether that's abnormal or not. But there's also a vibe that Marinakis might be sort of sending the feelers out to the fans as to what they think about Sean Dyche as well. And undoubtedly, it does for me, and me and Tom alluded to it in the Newcastle play, it feels like Ange is one bad loss away from losing his job. You know, if we lost 7-8-0 to Chelsea, which I hope won't happen and I can't see, but, you know, they're the type of results that often see managers go, I think it could be the end of him. So if he wants to turn it around at Forest, he's got to get his act together and get results pretty sharpish.
Okay. What do you think would happen if somehow we ended up beating Chelsea?
It'd certainly buy more time. I think it wouldn't win the fans over, but because of the unexpected nature of it, it would certainly buy a bit more time. It'd generate some excitement, and it depends the performance as well. I think I'm really unsure as to what Ange is going to do, because he went to Newcastle, played a completely different, un-Ange style, and, you know, first half kept a clean sheet. If we go and play that way against Chelsea and get a win, then he's almost in a sticky situation, because he's came in, the club has brought him in to do this big change, yet he's had to go back to basics, back to what we know, and it's came through. So it is more about the manner. You know, if we win playing that way, that almost puts another nail in Ange's coffin, because we know that's not really what he's here to do, and that still worked. So, yeah, it's really interesting, this Chelsea game. It'll be a tough game. We've done okay against Chelsea, particularly away from home, not so much at home, but the games have always been competitive. They're not quite at the level of Arsenal or Liverpool, I don't think. And anything can happen in the early kickoff. That's when we beat Brighton 7-0, I think, the last time we played at home at that time. But if I'm honest, I can't see it. I know I'm negative, and I do try to be positive at times, but I just can't see it at the minute.
Yeah, you never quite know what you're going to get from Chelsea. And to be honest, you never quite know at the moment what you're going to get from Forest. So let's put you on the spot then. So do you see Ange staying as manager? Or to ask it a slightly different question, would you like Ange to stay as manager?
No, I don't like it. I've never liked it. I always was very sceptical of it, because when Nuno came and replaced Cooper, it was a different style, but it was very similar. It was based on defensive football, and the only thing that really changed straight away was the formation to put Morgan back in the middle. But the principles remain the same, and obviously the results didn't really come to the second season. But it felt like, once we saw it on the pitch, the logical progression, whereas Ange doesn't feel like it feels like we're ripping up the book again, going back to square one, starting again, when what was in place already didn't really feel like it was failing on the pitch. So that's why I was not behind it, not because it was Ange or who he was or what he'd achieved, but because of that style of play. And he has slightly adapted. We saw the death of the inverted fullback thing for the past two games, and obviously a more defensive approach against Newcastle. I don't like the appointment of Ange, but if the best option the club can serve to replace him is Sean Dyche, then I think we have to wait a little bit longer. I think the club also are in a sticky situation financially. I don't know what the terms of Nuno's payoff were, but sometimes they get a lump sum. Other times, because he's now got the West Ham job, they might be out of jeopardy. But either way, they paid him some money. They've obviously got Ange on a shorter contract than Nuno was on, but they'll have to pay him off. If they want who they genuinely want, which I think is Marco Silva, they'll have to get him out of Fulham, or they'll have to put a new manager on a new salary. I think there could be another sort of financial problem from that point. So I think the club are limited with who could come in to replace Ange. And as much as I don't like him, I think they have to stick with him for now.
Okay, so you're a Dyche skeptic. We'll come back to that in just a second. When Nuno went, and let's be honest, it was pretty apparent that he had to go one way or the other. Who would you have appointed at that moment in time?
I wanted the club to be ambitious, and we might not have got somebody like Oliver Glasner or somebody like Iraola, but we were 3 games into a season. We've got a really good win against Brentford. We've just had a really good transfer window, really exciting transfer window. We've got a European season coming. And at that point, I was thinking, go on, Forest, do something ambitious. Under Marinakis, the one thing we hadn't really done was get a manager out of a club. Cooper was a bit different because he was on gardening leave, but we hadn't got a manager who was in work out of a club. It was always who was off the market. And we'd done well. I was excited by the Karanka appointment. Limucci turned out well. Cooper obviously was a success, and certainly Nuno was. So he'd not done too badly on paper, but I just thought, go and be ambitious, Evangelos. And maybe if it doesn't work, go for somebody like Ange or I think Mourinho has been talked about at the time, which both of them weren't names I was excited by. But the fact of how quickly it came about showed Forest just went straight for Ange. They identified him as their man. And maybe, who knows, maybe they put feelers out to Silva and Glasner, because we know the club liked them. But I just thought, go and be ambitious, Forest. Go and try and build on it with a manager who's currently in form, who's got a lot of hype behind them and got a lot of recent success, because it didn't finish well for Ange. And ultimately, if Ange lost the Europa League final, he is not stood in our dugout now at all. He's got the job, I think, because Marinakis thinks, right, well, I'm going to put all the eggs in the Europa League basket like Ange did. That's a very risky thing to do. And Ange on league form, I know he got 5th in the first season, but people have recency bias. Remember what came. 17th place in a final loss to a really poor Man United side would not have landed in that Forest job. So I just wish we were being a bit more ambitious, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion, I think I'm always a little bit skeptical about managers who seem to struggle to have a plan B. And Ange, he tried it against Newcastle, but the trouble is, during the match, he can't change things either.
He never can. I mean, even when he was playing his style of play, I just look at him and he just looks helpless. And his coaching staff seem to be pretty anonymous. His subs almost seem like he's guessing. It just looks like, whereas Nuno's always in conversation with someone, always on the move, always looking for his next play. I just see Ange looking there quite defenceless.
I think Ange is, how management styles go in and out of fashion. I think the management approach that Ange has maybe has had its day, in the same way as, to use the obvious parallel, and we discussed this in our Football Terrorist show, Aitor Karanka left the club after deciding he couldn't work with the hierarchy the way it was. Martin O'Neill was appointed, and of course that got very, very testy because of all those accusations of dinosaur, which, it got quite personal at times. Let's be honest about that. And of course,
and he's not dropped it.
Well, and O'Neill, was not a success, and it was a widely recognised thing that O'Neill's tactics as a manager were out of date. So it's interesting to whether that same has befallen Ange. Now, let's talk about the other issue at hand, which is if Ange does go, that the rumour mill is reporting, and this has come from reputable sources, that they are looking at Sean Dyche in terms of having the next guy lined up. Now, Sean Dyche, out of work, somebody who probably... There's a lot of characteristics about Dyche's teams that I like. Firstly, he gets the defence solid, and to me that's always a starting point. Secondly, he's very good at getting a team to play greater than the sum of its parts, and that is regardless of circumstance. So although he wasn't successful at Everton, he kept Everton up at a time when the club was in absolute turmoil. So those are things that I think are really real positives about the way he goes about things, and he's got experience in Europe. On the other hand, I also understand the argument that Forest, it seems like a we're settling for avoiding relegation type appointment, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I don't like about it. And when I went on Sky, if you go on Sky Sports Premier League on Twitter, the thing I said that they clipped up, and I maybe slightly regret saying, is that it feels like the new Big Sam appointment, which maybe is a step too far. And, I think that was a bit harsh. But that's the thing. I think so early on into a season, we've played 8 games or 7 games in the Premier League. We can't be accepting that we're in a relegation battle. On the players more than anything, could you imagine the players this early on? After we beat Brentford 3-1 at the start of the season, 2 months later, they've got Sean Dyche in there who had to go and save Everton from Frank Lampard's awful football and things like that. I just feel like it's an acceptance and a resignation and an admission that we don't need. I think further down the line, if this persists and if we get to past Christmas and we're really in a relegation battle, then Sean Dyche would be the perfect manager to come in. Like you say, knows the club, been at the club before, lives in Nottingham, which I don't think Ange does, if reports serve you correctly. He's got the coaching staff in Steve Stoney and Wone that know the club as well, maybe more than he does. He's got a relationship with the owners. He's been there, I think, behind the scenes and watching games with them. So I think that's the perfect appointment for Forest if we are genuinely in a relegation battle. I just don't think now is the time to even be considering that yet. I think we've still got Europe on the cards, which Dyche hasn't managed in before. I know Burnley got qualified, but then I don't think they got through the playoffs. So, yeah, I just feel like it. And it's also taking a step back to what we did before. Why did we then get rid of Nuno? I didn't agree with getting rid of Nuno, with changing the direction of the club. But if you've done that, then you have to give it a bit more time than a month. And a lot has happened in this month, and Ange has not really had much time on the training field to implement this new style. So I feel like I'm defending him when I don't want to. But I just feel like it's a bit too early to get Dyche in.
Well, the bottom line is Ange is the incumbent, so we've kind of got to get behind him, but there's no getting away from the fact that he's had an awful start results-wise. And I think Marriage on the Midlands is very vocal about the fact that actually, performance-wise, it hasn't all been bad. Obviously, we've had some really nice passages of play. It's just that because he's got no regard for defensive solidity, we're on the back foot all the way through, aren't we? So, and most of those matches that we've had so far, we could and should have got results out of, whether, sometimes draws rather than wins, but we could and should have got results out of pretty much all of those games, I would say, with the exception of Newcastle.
And I don't think they've been consistent enough. Yeah, we've looked good in spells, Betis away, and that's the thing that people regard and point to it, Ange. That was the best football I've ever seen Forest play, I think. It just looked like every time we ventured forward, we'd score, and that was so exciting. But since then, we've played 9 or 7 halves of football, and we've looked pretty abject in them all. And if you look at the stats against Sunderland and Midtjylland, I think we had 22 shots in both games. But I never sat there and thought Forest were going to score. I didn't think we looked like a threat. We didn't look dynamic like we did under Nuno. And under Nuno, the attacks were more sparse. But every time we got over that halfway line, I was excited. I thought something might happen. Whereas it just seems so predictable, and we've got into a rut almost. So, yeah, we've looked good in spells. We should have beaten Burnley, I think. We should have beaten Betis, but obviously the second half performance didn't merit that. And it's funny, I think it all hinges on that Swansea game. His second game in, it's the game that he built up as, my style is now going to be implemented. I think Arsenal, everybody accepted. But coming into Swansea, he was talking the talk. And if the game ends at 90 minutes, we win 2-1, who knows what happens? The confidence then builds. He's more confident as a manager. The players buy into it. The fans buy into it. And then you can see them 2 goals in stoppage time, and it all falls apart from there. And it's just so, to think that it's all snowballed from that moment, for me, it could have been so different.
Yeah, and as Baz has said many, many times in the many years we've been doing this podcast and blogging before that, the measure of a manager isn't how he does when he's doing well, it's how he copes when things are going badly. So that remains to be seen. So the other issue that's at play, obviously, with Nuno going, was the arrival of Edu as the global director of football or whatever it is. And we're going to talk a little bit more on some of those themes after this.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast.
When it comes to what your family eats and drinks, you know your choices matter. You're the expert because you know what fits your life. And getting it right starts with good information. That's why America's beverage companies are sharing more information about our ingredients at goodtoknowfacts.org. No spin, no judgments, just the facts straight from the experts for more than 140 beverage ingredients. Visit goodtoknowfacts.org.
Welcome to YATESY'S Espresso Bar.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast, and YATESY'S Espresso Bar with me, Rich Ferraro, and him, George Edwards. Now, George, before the break, we were talking about the first team managerial position, and of course, Nuno left because he doesn't get on with Edu. The other departure in those echelons of power is Ross Wilson, who has gone to Newcastle. Now, in Football Terrorists, our show at the weekend, there was some speculation that maybe Ross Wilson had his nose put out of joint by the arrival of Edu, but I've also heard that it's very simply a case of Newcastle really, really wanted Wilson, and there was a buyout clause in his contract, and they met that figure. So which version do you believe?
I believe the second, to be honest, and I think I said on the pod last season, Ross actually came to my university and did a speech last year. I planted myself on the second row, and it was really insightful to get his opinion on it. From what he was talking about his job role, I think there was still room for somebody like Edu next to him. I think his role in the club was more the day-to-day runnings of it. He was very involved with the players, and he sort of met them on almost daily occasion, which I think Edu is sort of above that. But in terms of recruitment and managerial things, I think his was only sort of advisory role. I don't think that was in his sort of job title, which I think is what Edu's taken. And I got the sense from him that day as well that he was ready for a new challenge. He was talking about how he's never really been in the same place that often. He's rose to fame very quickly in the football clubs that he's been at. But he was saying, I've been at Forest quite a while. And I think he was obviously didn't want to hint that he was ready for a new challenge as such, but that's the vibe I got from him. So when I think it's been in the pipeline for quite a while, the news about it really didn't surprise me. I just think he's ready for a new challenge. I think Newcastle, if you're being honest, and I know we're Forest fans, but that probably is a step up. It's a club in the Champions League. It's a club that's certainly on the up, got a lot of investment at the minute, so much excitement about them.
And so I bet part of his challenge there is going to be to negotiate the PSR conundrums as well, because Newcastle have never quite been able to do that without, obviously famously selling Elliot Anderson, for example, and they've never quite managed to work their way around it. I think the other thing that's worth keeping in mind is probably the fact that Wilson did stay at Forest until the end of the transfer window. And again, reading between the lines, I think that was probably part of the deal, in that with his break clause and whatever notice period he had to give, is probably something where he was quite possibly happy to stay at Forest for that, knowing that if he did that, they'd have an agreement that he'd be able to go on to the Newcastle job.
Yeah, certainly. And he's been a really good operator from what you can gather. Obviously, we're not really in the club, but it seems like he was a light figure. He was always side by side with Nicholas Randall at the games. So I think it will present a miss for Forest. And I think the key is who replaces him. And it's a position that obviously doesn't have to be filled, but I think Forest have been looking to fill it in a similar way, if not the same job title. But you look at the last appointment, or the last two appointments really, that Marinakis has made in terms of Edu and Ange, on the field and off the field, they both have caused chaos behind the scenes in the club. They've not gone down well. So this might be one of Marinakis' most important decisions, whether he fills that void and who he fills it with. Because if there's somebody else behind the scenes who doesn't get on with everybody, it's going to create a really, really sticky situation. I think since Nick Randall took a step away from the football side and focused on the business side, the club has really improved, and Dane Murphy was in that role. We knew Sirianos and Ross Wilson. So the club in that direction has headed really well. But how we replace Ross is so crucial to how we go forward, I think.
And maybe there's a tale there about, very public figures like Edu and Ange Postecoglou compared to the figures who, most of us couldn't pick out if we walked past them on the street, like your Ross Wilsons and your George Sirianoses. Maybe there's a tale to be told there.
And even your managers, Steve Cooper and Nuno, that they weren't the egos or the stature that Ange was. And that's probably a reason why Ange hasn't succeeded as well.
I wasn't going to say it, but you just did. Okay, let's move on. Let's have a little update on the women's team because we had Matt on the podcast on the weekend, and it was just before the women's team were kicking off against Durham, and unfortunately, it was 3 early goals in the first half that saw the Reds lose 3-0 to Durham. The lead was taken after 5 minutes, and by 23 minutes it was 3-0. And it could have been worse. It could have been better. Forest did have chances to get back into the game. Freya Thomas had an effort off the line, and we saw both Chantal Boylorca and Amy Claypole coming close. Slightly interesting team selection in terms of the fact that, for example, Molly Green, Charlie Wellings were left out from the start. So I think this is a case of Carly Davies, with all these new signings, trying to find a way around how to navigate a new division and a new squad. Now, I'm going to just go back to something that Matt said at the weekend.
Yeah, well, it is actually like living in a parallel universe sometimes, supporting the women, so putting them first over the men. To the point that the last 3 games I think we've played have all been more or less simultaneously played at the same time as the men's. So you're often watching on one hand, we've had a run of 3 wins now. You watching on one hand these wins come in, and watching the other side, the men doing quite the opposite. It's very yin and yang at the moment.
And, of course, as soon as Matt said that, then the women went off and they lost 3-0 away. So let's, therefore, hear a slightly more considered opinion because Carly Davies, I say, there was a little bit of controversy over the team selection. I think there was, a few questions about the way in which Forest conceded those goals really early, and they have been conceding goals in the first half. So what did she have to say to the fans after the game?
We know that there's an expectation to win games. There's certainly an expectation for me to win games, but we're going to make mistakes. We're all human. I am, the players are. But what we do is reflect and we review, and that's something that is a huge process of ours. It's not something where we point fingers and point blame. So we need them to stick with us as well. Be positive around the group, be positive around me, trust that we're heading in the right direction, and stick with us, and we will get the wins for you.
Now, George, one of the reasons I wanted to play those clips is because Matt made the point about the yin and yang between the men's game and the women's game, particularly for Forest supporters. Can you imagine a men's first team coach in the top 2 divisions of men's football in England? Can you imagine if the coach, after a 3-0 defeat, said, we need to just take a bit of stock and review and reflect, and let's not panic. there's things that I can do better, there's things that players can do better, but trust the process. Can you imagine that happening?
Probably not. No, probably not. I think it's a lot more of a relaxed environment, and it's probably an environment where Forest can thrive. They've not obviously been in the WSL2 before. They're adapting to the league. They've started the season quite well, I think. I think it's all about the home form this year. They've got, 3 wins from 6 games and lost the other 3. For a team that's came up, that's a really strong start. So I think there's a lot more patience in the women's game, particularly, obviously, if you get to the WSL, the expectation will be then to compete almost straight away because teams get swallowed up there. I think Crystal Palace went up there, didn't they, and got completely swallowed back down. So you have to almost have instant success there. But there is really a time, I think, in the lower levels to build, to grow, and to really find the direction that you want to go in. And I think Carly certainly is steering them on that right direction.
Yeah, and with going up, I mean, the gulf between the different divisions from coming up from the previous division into WSL2 is something where, and as Adam explained earlier in the season as well, the very nature of the contracts that women's players often have. So there is going to be a high turnover of players. There's going to be a high turnover of trying to get players who played at a higher level before, which Forest have done in the 2 years since they announced they were going to become professional. And naturally, that leads to some times when things are a little bit disjointed. But one thing that Matt was also very proud to point out is that when Forest score, then if they score, they tend to score more than one, and they tend not to concede after scoring. So in this instance, if that effort from Freya Thomas hadn't been cleared off the line, then you wonder if the players would have had the belief to try and get something out, even though they conceded those 3 early goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly last season, 3-0 wouldn't have been, that'd have been a sort of quite a small scoreline, wouldn't it, with a lot of the scorelines that we were seeing last season. So,
there's definitely no golfing class like there was last season. Where you had teams who were run on a shoestring, where they were, it's a very, very different set of circumstances, I think. So fingers crossed that the women managed to pick up from there and get back to it in the near future. Right, let's move on to the other issue that has been on the agenda just very recently, which is plans for the ground. And again, we touched upon it on the weekend's show and we didn't really have a chance to discuss, but it sounds as though the revised plans are very much based upon the idea of not knocking down the Peter Taylor stand, but actually augmenting it, enhancing it, and filling in the corners of the Trent end to make the stand much taller, to build upwards and backwards, and as I say, to use those corners of the Trent end to get an extra 5,000 seats on top of that to make a ground of about 43 to 45,000. Now, I don't know. The trouble is that this has been dragging on for so long. It's difficult to know what is the right thing to do, isn't it?
Well, and it's difficult to know whether to believe it, doesn't it? I think there was a picture. I read the article in The Sun, and they used the picture that they originally announced in 2017. But we're nearly 10 years down the line from there, and you're thinking we've actually seen no change apart from the Philippe Montagnier stand. So, I think, and I went to Anfield last season when the Anfield Road stand was under redevelopment, and there was obviously a difference in entrance to the stadium, but once you were in there, you couldn't tell what was going on. Then I went there the next season and suddenly it's all finished. So that was a really good strategy, I think, that Liverpool took, and I wondered whether Forest could achieve that, particularly. The logistics look quite difficult because I don't think they've got that much space behind it. And you're thinking if they're building in the car park, where the hell are all the executives and the buses and where are they going to park? So there's going to have to be a lot of logistical stuff that's going to have to be sorted out. The use of new architects, I think, is a good sign as well. It certainly indicates the end of Benoit and the end of Tom Cartledge, who was the chairman, and maybe 6 months ago he stepped down. I think that looks like that's a partnership that's ended. It looks exciting. The development stands up really good. I think the fact we're not going to lose attendance is really strong because we can still grow and get more people and hopefully allow more season ticket holders in. I think Forest's number one priority has to be selling the tickets because they're on about 45,000 capacity. Well, if you go on the Forest website at the moment, I think the Porto tickets are on general sale, that there's a lot of allocation left for the Leeds game, and the club aren't selling the tickets at the minute, so they'd struggle to sell 45,000 tickets in the current climate if they're selling it at the price they are. So as much as I think we have to prioritise the development of the stand, and the Peter Taylor stand has needed a glow up for a long time, we've got to make sure we're selling them tickets and we're still in the Premier League to sell them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no economist, but there's a supply and demand issue, isn't there? So Forest have been able, as Maradona and the Midlands has said on previous podcasts, right from when the first kind of couple of months of Steve Cooper's tenure, Forest have been the hottest ticket in town in Nottingham. And so, therefore, people wanted to buy tickets. Now, of course, the trouble with going up to the Premier League is you're less likely to be very, very successful just because the competition is that much harder. But you're also competing at a different level, so there's a demand there. But while there's 30,000 seats and you have to give 3,000 or, between 1,000 and 3,000 to opposition fans, then it means that supply and demand means you can charge more. If there's more seats built, then they may have to think about their pricing strategies, mightn't they, in order to, and you've been stung by this in the past with when they changed the concessions for younger supporters. Older people have been stung by it as well with the changing of the senior citizens threshold. So they're going to have to think about how to do that, not only to fill the ground, but also in terms of maintaining their status as a community club.
Yeah, certainly. And obviously the tickets went on general sale. The ticket that's one seat next to me was on sale for the Porto game next Tuesday. And I said to my friend at uni, do you want to come back and watch Forest on next Thursday night? How much is it? 70 quid. No, thanks. So if there's a reasonable-ish price, then I think Cam would have came and would have had a lot more situations like that where the seats would have been filled. So Forest have got to sort of almost work out what their priority is. And I think until they don't sell tickets, because they've always found a way. I think last season, some of the FA Cup games took a while to sell out, but eventually the ground was full. I think until they're actually stung where Marinakis is sat there looking around and he can see empty seats, there's not really going to be a message passed across to the ownership that this isn't right. But this is my last year at uni. Once I graduate next year, I know that I'm probably not going to have the time to go to as many games, but equally, I'm not going to be able to afford to go to, if we're in Europe, or the European games, the away games, or the travel. It's a very expensive thing. And I think Forest have got to remember where we came from, that we've only been having success for the past 4 years. And it wasn't that long ago that we were stagnant in the Championship, and paying nearly £1,000 for a season ticket would have been laughed out of the park.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say is that, as things stand, the newest stand in the ground is 30 years old. And it's one thing paying 70 quid to go to a modern stadium. I don't necessarily mean something like the Hill Dickinson or the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, because I should imagine ticket prices are pretty high for the good seats there in the big matches. But still, we're going to something which in football terms is a bit of an architectural relic, and the facilities reflect that, don't they?
Yeah, when you go to, obviously it's different for away fans because there's a cap on the tickets, which I think is completely the right way to go around it. But you go to somewhere like Tottenham and you think you're going there for the match, but the facilities are really nice, the location's really good, you feel safe. Whereas it feels like for Forest at the minute, you just go in for the match. You're not really getting any extra experience. I sit in the Brighton Club Upper, there's really cramped concourses. The stairs are pretty poor. There's no hot water, which has been widely documented. So they've got to consider all the options. But like I say, until they're actually stung by it, I think that's certainly not at the top of their priority list, because putting some new hot water pipes doesn't really get the attraction that a new stand is.
I was just going to say that I remember going to Wolves away in the first season back in the Premier League and going like, oh my God, they've got hot water.
You stung, aren't you? Yeah.
I'd just forgotten that it was a thing in football grounds.
I burnt myself. I think on a wake, I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know football grounds had hot water.
Yeah, who knew? Okay, well, we'll leave it there for this particular visit to YATESY'S Espresso Bar. Obviously, Forest men are playing Chelsea at home in the early kickoff on Saturday the 18th, this coming Saturday, 12:30 kickoff. And then the women's team are playing on Sunday away at Everton at Goodison Park, which is quite exciting. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you very much to George Edwards. Thank you to Matt. And also thank you for listening. And we will be back with our report on the Chelsea game. And in the meantime, come on you Reds.
You've been listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest Podcast. Follow us on X, Insta, TikTok, Threads and Blue Sky, and listen via Apple, Spotify and YouTube. All the links are available at 1865.football.
Well, kept losing me way at the end there, didn't I?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.